The sun was sinking low over the dry, wind-scoured plains, casting a blood-orange glow across the weathered boards of the dusty main street, and Elijah McGraw, a rancher who'd long since learned to keep his head down and his hands busy, rode in slow from the far pasture, the leather creak of his saddle the only sound until a voice, ragged, desperate, and shaking, cut through the fading light. "Help, now, or I'll die." And he turned, instinct before thought, to see a woman stumbling from the alley beside the old feed store, her dress torn, her hair tangled in streaks of dirt and blood, eyes wide with the kind of terror a man never forgets, and she clutched at his coat as if her fingers could anchor her to life itself, whispering words so low he had to lean down to hear them. "They know I saw. They know I saw what they did." And before he could ask, a shadow moved at the mouth of the alley, broad shoulders framed in the dying light, a face half hidden under a black hat pulled low, and Elijah knew enough of the world to recognize trouble when it came looking, so without thinking, he hauled her up into the saddle in front of him, spurring his horse down the street toward his ranch on the outskirts of town, the pounding of hooves behind them confirming what he already knew. They weren't going to let her go easy, and the wind tore at them as they crossed the dry creek bed, the sound of gunfire cracking through the twilight, one bullet whining past his ear as he pushed the horse harder, feeling her small frame shaking against his chest. And when they finally reached the ranch house, he all but dragged her inside, bolting the door and pulling the rifle from above the mantel, his eyes scanning the dark outside, listening for the sound of pursuit. And for a long moment, there was nothing, only the pounding of his own heart. Until she spoke again, voice hoarse. It was at the livery. After dark. They brought him in, and her eyes met his with a look that made his stomach turn. He wasn't breathing, she said, but they laughed, said it didn't matter, said he'd talk soon enough. And then they started with the hot iron, and Elijah felt the old anger stir in him, the one he'd buried under years of solitude after losing his family to a senseless feud, because he knew what it meant when men talked about making a dead man talk. He'd seen it once before, in the war, and the memory had never left him. And she went on, telling him about the sheriff and two of the wealthiest men in town, about a hidden cellar under the livery where they took those who asked the wrong questions, about the sound of screams muffled by dirt and stone. And Elijah realized this was more than just a runaway or a woman in the wrong place. It was a secret worth killing for, and now that he'd taken her in, he was part of it whether he liked it or not. And outside, the wind picked up, carrying with it the faint creak of a saddle, the shift of weight on dry boards, and Elijah's grip on the rifle tightened, because men who carried darkness like that didn't stop just because the sun went down. And sure enough, the knock came. 3 slow raps, too polite for the hour, followed by the sheriff's voice calling his name, smooth and steady like this was just another visit. But Elijah knew better, and when he didn't answer, the sheriff went on, "Heard you picked up a stray, McGraw. Might be you got something belongs to the town." And Elijah stepped closer to the window, keeping to the shadows, watching the shapes of 3 men standing in the yard, one with his hand resting on the butt of his revolver, and the woman's hand found his arm, fingers trembling, her whisper urgent, "If they take me back, they'll bury me where no one will find me." And that was all he needed, because a man could live a long time alone, but there came a moment when doing nothing was worse than dying, and this was that moment. So he called back through the door, his voice low but carrying, "Ain't nothing here for you." And the silence that followed was heavier than the threat, the kind of silence that told him this wasn't over. And after a long pause, boots crunched in retreat, the sound fading into the night. But Elijah knew they'd be back, and when she asked why he was risking himself for her, he only said, "Because somebody has to." And over the next days, as they kept to the ranch, he learned her name. Claire. And she told him in pieces how she'd been cleaning rooms at the hotel when she overheard talk of a man riding in from Denver with proof that could ruin half the town council, how she'd followed the whispers to the livery and seen more than she could bear, and how, when she tried to slip away, they'd caught her, branded her mind with threats so vivid she could still feel their hands. And Elijah listened without flinching, his mind working the way it used to when he was younger, when he was a man who'd fought back instead of walking away. And he began to set traps along the back fence line, oiling his rifle, stockpiling water and food, because the thing about men like the sheriff was they didn't forgive and they didn't forget. And sure enough, the night came when the dogs barked and the smell of smoke drifted in on the wind, and Elijah knew they'd set fire to the north pasture to draw him out, but he didn't take the bait, instead sending Claire through the trapdoor under the floorboards while he took position by the window, the firelight flickering off the barrel of his gun, and when the first shadow broke across the yard, he fired, the man dropping without a sound, the others scattering, and the fight that followed was the kind they didn't sing about in saloons. Close, dirty, desperate, but when it was over, the yard was still, the flames in the pasture dying down, and the sheriff was gone, wounded or worse, leaving behind only the echo of boots in the dark. And Elijah knew they'd won themselves time but not peace, because a secret like that didn't die easy. And as the first light of dawn broke over the hills, Claire came up from the cellar, her eyes meeting his with a quiet gratitude that said more than words, and he nodded once, turning back to the horizon, knowing they'd have to decide whether to run or to burn the whole rotten thing down. But for now, they were alive, and sometimes that was enough. And if this story struck you deep, if you could feel the dust in your lungs, the heat of the fire, and the cold resolve of a man who'd had enough, then don't just ride on. Subscribe to this channel, because there are more truths to be told, more secrets to be unearthed, and your support is what keeps them from being buried.